Of all the harmful misinformation spread over the past couple of years, one of the most disturbing false narratives was targeted at the Nobel Prize-winning human medicine, ivermectin. What you're about to see will reveal the motive behind the smear campaign against one of the safest and most effective medicines of this era, a medicine that, according to the numerous top scientists I've interviewed this year, could have ended the pandemic before it began.
So things are clearly bad, but they're being made even worse by people who have refused to take the vaccine and instead are swallowing horse paste.
Horse dewormer. There's no clinical evidence that indicates that this works.
It goes beyond that. We actually know that it doesn't work.
Ivermectin is ineffective against COVID.
But could put you in a coma.
It can kill you.
It can kill you.
Turns out I got COVID. So we immediately threw the kitchen sink at it. All kinds of meds, monoclonal antibodies, ivermectin.
One of those drugs he mentioned, ivermectin, is something more often used to deworm horses.
We should talk about that.
That bothered you.
It should bother you too. They're lying at your network about people taking human drugs versus drugs for veterinary.
Calling it a horse dewormer is not a flattering thing. I get that.
It's a lie.
They shouldn't have said that.
Why did they do that?
I don't know.
You're the medical guy over there.
Ivermectin can be a very effective medication.
You are more likely to die from taking Tylenol than ivermectin, yet the FDA calls this a dangerous horse deworming medicine.
What initially led this was an FDA Twitter account that used the term y'all to express denigration of ivermectin as a horse drug. I have horses. The truth is that the dose that's used for horses by body weight is the same dose that's recommended for humans, but it's formulated and manufactured to a quality standard that's very different.
Lots of medicines are used in both animals and humans, so it's not a sufficient argument for somebody to say, it's a horse dewormer.
Yesterday, the CDC put out a national advisory on this, warning the whole country against taking this drug, ivermectin, formulated for horses and cows and sheep.
With that memo fired to every doctor, then suddenly me and all my early treatment colleagues around the country, we were faced with problems like we'd never had before.
I work as an emergency room doctor. And not only an emergency room doctor, I teach advanced trauma life support, a course to other doctors that want to work in the emergency room on how to stabilize patients. We were being told there's nothing you can do. Just wait for Fauci and the FDA to acknowledge a vaccine that they were going to create, and there's no treatment, they said. Why would you want to decrease access to quality life-saving measures for people who are fighting a worldwide pandemic?
So it was the first time in history that we ever saw a doctor who could be prosecuted for using a generic, safe and effective drug for the application that doctor thought was appropriate.
My group of five, the core five of us ICU doctors, collectively were some of the most highly published doctors in the history of critical care medicine. Paul Marik is the most published practicing intensivist in the world.
As we sit here today, I'm the most published person in my field in history. But when COVID-19 hit, my clinical and academic world was turned upside down.
Twitter, in its wisdom, has decided to suspend the account of Dr. Robert Malone. Now, Robert Malone happens to be the inventor of the mRNA technology of making vaccines. His Twitter account has been suspended because he was allegedly spreading misinformation on COVID-19 vaccines. Let that sink in.
We have made contributions to our field for decades. So when we find ourselves like dismissed, and they'll do that to anyone, you're suddenly fringe.
Touted as a miracle prevention and cure by far-right commentators and anti-vaxxers.
I'm not, although I've been characterized as a right-wing Proud Boy. This is a bipartisan issue, and the physicians represented here are truly a bipartisan group.
Our lives started going sideways professionally. Paul started getting numerous complaints against him that he's never had in his career.
For the first time in my entire career, I could not be a doctor. I had to stand by idly. I had to stand by idly watching these people die.
from the FDA, Emergency Use Authorization of Medical Products and Related Authorities. For the FDA to issue an emergency use authorization, there must be no adequate, approved, and available alternative to the candidate product for diagnosing, preventing, or treating the disease or condition. If ivermectin were an effective treatment, the vaccines never would have gotten emergency use authorization in the US.
If a viable therapeutic strategy existed for outpatients, then the logic supporting universal vaccination with largely experimental products is no longer supportable.
The war on ivermectin is waged by very powerful forces with a lot of money. I mean, public health was built on an obsessive global vaccination policy, which ivermectin would have threatened.
We've got Pfizer's third quarter earnings. Revenue, they're projecting to be $98 to $102 billion.
Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. Do you know how much profit they made from these shots? $1,000 every second from Wuhan virus vaccines.
You're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars and geopolitical implications that would be significantly affected if the people had access to a safe and widely available medicine.
This is an incredibly cheap drug. It's off license, it's generic, it can be manufactured in huge amounts in India, remarkably low cost.
Merck's patent on ivermectin expired in 1996. In 2021, Merck released a statement claiming that ivermectin was not an effective treatment against COVID-19 and bizarrely claimed, quote, a concerning lack of safety data in the majority of studies. It was plenty safe for Merck to distribute widely when it was still under patent, but now they're claiming the safety record is insufficient.
Folks need to understand that just because there is an article out there that asserts that something is false, recognize that those are paid.
Every major media outlet in the United States shares at least one board member with at least one drug company. Let me put it in perspective for you. These board members wake up, they go to a meeting at Merck or Pfizer, and then they have their driver take them over to a meeting with NBC to decide what kind of programming that network is going to air. They can't be honest and objective about Big Pharma because Big Pharma pays their bills.
In fact, one analysis claimed that 9 out of the top 10 drug makers spent more on marketing than they did on research.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
The royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
By Pfizer.
If asked the question, did you know how much influence your former employer had on big media and so on? I have no idea. It is clear that the pharmaceutical industry has a great deal of sway on what goes on. If you can shape the message, then you can shape the world, and that's what they've done.
When was the last time you turned on the news and ever got an update about how the rest of the world is handling COVID?
A group of South African doctors has launched an urgent court application. They are seeking easier access to ivermectin.
Globally, at least 5 countries want to use ivermectin to treat COVID-19, including India and Argentina.
There are numerous concrete tests in medical journals around the world that ivermectin does work.
The earliest reports we had, one of them we had in Peru, where they got into a good mode of using multi-drug treatment with an ivermectin-based approach, that they were crushing their curves.
And the president of the Tokyo Medical Association announced to all doctors during a summer surge that they should use ivermectin in the treatment. Within weeks, the hospitalization rates reported out of Japan were lower than at any other time in the pandemic.
The real proof positive came when COVID-19 really hit hard in Mexico City. They finally, after lots of struggle, came in with an ivermectin-based multi-drug approach and literally cleared out their hospitals. And then we had reports all the way through that various states in India.
In India, the government has been widely promoting the use of ivermectin. State leaders have just declared that Uttar Pradesh is now officially COVID-free. A region with nearly as many people as the entire United States is totally COVID-free.
The miracle success of Uttar Pradesh, not one mention of ivermectin being used.
In the countries that it has been used, in the countries where the studies are
The results are not good, they are overwhelming. They are well over 90% success rate.
In the United States, it's a horse dewormer, it's horse paste, and only the illiterate, ignorant, and or unvaccinated use it.
The key paradox is if you look at the mortality rate in the United States, one of the most highly funded medical care systems in the world. And what we find is the mortality in the United States is among the worst in the world.
If you look at these innumerable failed policies, there's only one way to understand them. They are literally written by pharmaceutical companies. They can design trials to fail, to disprove the use of cheap medicines, and they can make things appear that they don't work.
I sit as a non-voting member of the active committee for drugs with NIH. I've seen the dynamics of what are going on with all those trials, most of which have failed. Unfortunately, it's eminently possible to manipulate the outcomes of a clinical study. If you want a study to fail, that's dead easy.
Now their fourth quote-unquote negative study of ivermectin in a major medical journal, and each time is a media frenzy.
There was a systematic review looking at randomized controlled trials that had been done, and they found that there was no benefit for ivermectin in reducing mortality, death to COVID-19, no reduction in symptoms or duration of symptoms for COVID-19, so it does not work.
People need to understand that academics have been threatened with losing their position and threatened with getting no further research grants if they speak out against the narrative. Guess why that is? 2/3 of the world's non-commercial biological research is funded by just 3 bodies. The Wellcome Trust in the UK, the NIH, and specifically the NIAID under Tony Fauci, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
There's this pattern that is consistent with a concerted effort to mislead the public by withholding information using modern technology, media, censorship, really, let's call it what it is, thought control.
He could actually control exactly what people think, and that is our job.
Yeah. Whenever you have clear-cut evidence that a drug works, you have an ethical obligation to immediately let the people know so that they could have access.
What are you telling people is the optimal profile?
I want a pill, orally administered, single pill, given for 7 to 10 days, little drug-drug interaction and low toxicity. Give me that and I'll be really happy.
Ivermectin has been used safely for decades, has no known drug interactions, won a Nobel Prize for its success treating humans, and is on the WHO's list of the safest, most effective medicines in the entire world.
And it showed an 86% effectiveness to prevent people from contracting COVID.
Ivermectin has been used over 4 billion times, and it's used for a wide variety of treatments.
Ivermectin has been shown to possess different anti-inflammation, antiviral, and anti-tumor properties.
Clinical studies abroad suggest it works.
All the studies show that it does have a positive effect.
That is the thing about ivermectin. It's not good, it's great.
I have never seen an evidence base this large with 81 controlled trials, 10 years of in vitro studies in the lab against a dozen RNA viruses, all showing that ivermectin stops replication. It literally is, in my mind, the single greatest public health achievement in our history of infection control in the world.